So today I'm going to read from the book Gulag Archipelago. The reason I choose this book is because I was recently having a conversation with my brother, and the conversation came from a post he sent to me on Instagram. And the post was about was basically a drummer. Well, he calls himself a solo snare drummist, and he was having a performance. I assume it is somewhere in Holland or Holland, Netherlands, whatever you choose to call it. Nonetheless, this performance was a man clutching onto a snare drum in one hand and a drumstick in the other. And he was just beating this thing down, right? Now, I assume that people paid to watch this event. And what the man was doing was something that I expect my 1-year-old son to do with the same level, do at the same level of proficiency. Now, people paid for this. And I was watching, observing the people in the audience, and there were some people who seemed as though they were enjoying this. Now, maybe they were enjoying this because of the craziness of it all. Like, this makes no sense. I paid to watch a solo snare drummist, expecting great skill, and instead what I'm observing is a man going mad with a drum, right? The other side could be that there might be people in the room who are saying or believing that this is great art. Now, this really pissed me off. When my brother asked me, Oscar, what do you think? And I said, my response was, this is how you know we've opened a portal to hell and brought the devil out. Because there are people in that audience who are going to leave and say that was a great show. Just like modern art with people sticking bananas on a wall and calling it contemporary art, postmodern art, and someone paying $2 million to eat the banana stuck on the wall. Now, why Gulag Archipelago? So the author is called Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the name. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the book is about a man who was imprisoned in Soviet Russia, being moved from one prison to another. That's why it's called Gulag. So the prisons are the gulags. The archipelago is like they're small islands all over the country, all over the Soviet Union. And this man's, my understanding thus far, is that his foundational idea is that things got this bad because at some point, everyone just decided to lie. And most others decided to accept the lie. Now, it's one thing if I'm lying and you're telling the truth. It's totally a different thing when we are both lying. It's much worse when everyone is lying. Now, I see this a lot in this modern world. We do this all the time. If you're supporting any ideal, religious, political, at some point you're presented evidence that shows that the idea that you support might not be as effective, as optimal as you thought it was. Now, most people that I see, double down. They don't say, yeah, with the evidence you've presented me, okay, I see how I should probably, walk back my idea, change my mind. Most people just double down. And that, dear viewers, leads us to this, the Gulag Archipelago. Now I'm going to read you from a few paragraphs from chapter 11. It's a pretty long book. Well, this is the abridged version. It's not quite as long. So this copy is around 500 pages. I'm going to read you from chapter 11, a few paragraphs from chapter 11. And the chapter is titled The Loyalists. Keep that in mind, the Loyalists. And it goes like this. Here we shall concern ourselves particularly with those Orthodox communists who made a display of their ideological orthodoxy first to the interrogator, then in the prison cells, and then in camp to all and everyone, and now recall their camp past in this light. By a strange selective process, none of them will be sloggers. Such people ordinarily had held big jobs before their arrests and had had an enviable situation. And in camp, they found it hardest of all to reconcile themselves to extinction, and they fought fiercest of all to rise above the universal zero. In this category were all the interrogators, prosecutors, judges, and camp officials who had landed behind bars, and all the theoreticians, dogmatists, and loudmouths. We have to understand them, and we would scoff at them. It was painful for them to fall. When you cut down trees, the chips will fly, was the cheerful proverb of justification. Think about that. Their justification was when you cut down trees, the chips fly away. And then suddenly, they themselves were chopped off with all the other chips. To say that things were painful for them is to say almost nothing. They were incapable of assimilating such a blow, such a downfall, and from their own people too, from the dear party, and from all appearances, for nothing at all. After all, they had been guilty of nothing as far as the party was concerned, nothing at all. It was painful for them to such a degree that it was considered taboo among them, uncommonly to ask, "What were you in prison for?" The only squeamish generation of prisoners, the rest of us in 1945, with tongues hanging out, used to recount our arrests, couldn't wait to tell the story to every chance newcomer we met and to the whole cell as if it were an anecdote. Here's the sort of people they were. Olga Sloisberg's husband had already been arrested, and they had come to carry out a search and arrest her too. The search lasted 4 hours, and she spent those 4 hours sorting out the minutes of the Congress of Stakhanovites, of the bristle and brush industry, of which she had been the secretary until the previous day. The incomplete state of the minutes troubled her more than her children, whom she was leaving forever. Even the interrogator conducting the search could not resist telling her, "Come on now, say farewell to your children." Here's the sort of people they were. A letter from her 15-year-old daughter came to Yelizaveta Tsvetkova in the Kazan prison for long-term prisoners. "Mama, tell me, write to me, are you guilty or not? I hope you weren't guilty, because then I won't join the Commercial, and I won't forgive them because of you. But if you are guilty, I won't write you anymore, and I will hate you." And the mother was stricken by remorse in a damp, grave-like cell with its dim little lamp. How could her daughter live without the chromosome? How could she be permitted to hate Soviet power? Better that she would better that she should hate me. And she wrote, "I am guilty. Enter the chromosome. Enter the comsomol. Comsomol. Forgive me for that. How could it be anything but hard? It was more than the human heart could bear, to fall beneath the beloved axe, then to have to justify its wisdom." I think we're seeing that a lot today. I love this quote: "To fall beneath the beloved axe, then to have to justify its wisdom." I'm going to pause here for a minute. Now, this isn't any political issue. I can see that, even in my own life. For example, I can say, this isn't something that has happened, but I'm I'm a capitalist, whether we like it or not. Everyone in this world, in most countries of the world, is a capitalist. As a capitalist, I start my business, right? I put in effort. But whether or not I put in effort, there are times when the business won't work out, and maybe I might have to file bankruptcy, shut down my business. Now, when this happens, I can hold resentment, or I can simply say, that's how the system works. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Nonetheless, I was playing the game, and now I'm falling. Now what has happened? I have fallen beneath the beloved axe. I will proceed. But that is the price a man pays for entrusting his God-given soul to human dogma. Even today, any Orthodox communist will affirm that Svetkova acted correctly. Even today, they cannot be convinced that this is precisely the perversion of small forces, that the mother perverted her daughter and harmed her soul. Here's the sort of people they were. YT gave sincere testimony against her husband, anything to aid the party. Oh, how one could pity them if at least they now how one could pity them if at least now they had come to comprehend their former wretchedness. This whole chapter could have been written quite differently if today at least they had forsaken their earlier views. Loyalty? And in our view, it is just plain pig-headedness. These devotees of the theory of development construed loyalty to that development to mean renunciation of any personal development whatsoever. Listen to this and tell me if this doesn't apply to everything we do in our lives. These devotees of the theory of development construed loyalty to that development to mean renunciation of any personal development whatsoever. To be so loyal that you cast everything else aside. This happens most commonly in relationships, where it can be pretty obvious that the person you're with is acting against the relationship or against you, but you're still sticking it out because you love them, right? So it's a renunciation of any personal, like you know what is going on here is bad, if not just for me, at least for the relationship as a whole, but you're still putting up with it. I will proceed. As Nikolai Adamovich said, after serving 17 years, we believed in the party and we were not mistaken. Is this loyalty or pig-headedness? No, it was not for show and not out of hypocrisy that they argued in the cells in defense of all the government's actions. They needed ideological arguments in order to hold on to a sense of their own rightness. Otherwise, insanity was not far off. How easily could how easily one could sympathize with them all, but they all see so clearly what their sufferings were, and they don't see wherein lies their own guilt. This sort of person was not arrested before 1937. And after 1938, very few such people were arrested. And that is why they were named the call up of 1937. And this would be permissible but shouldn't be allowed to blur the overall picture. Even at the peak, they were not the only ones being arrested. And those same peasants and workers and young people and engineers and technicians and agronomists and economists and ordinary believers continue to stream in as well. The call up of 1937 was very loquacious, and having access to the press and radio created the legend of 1937, a legend consisting of 2 points. One, if they if they arrested people at all under the Soviet government, it was only in 1937, and it is necessary to speak out and be indignant only about 1937. Two, in 1937, they were the only ones arrested. At the beginning of our book, we gave a conspectus of the waves pouring into the archipelago during the 2 decades up to 1937. How long all that dragged on, and how many millions there were. But the future call up of 1937 didn't bat an eyelid and found it all normal. They remained calm while society was being imprisoned. Their outrage reason boiled when their own fellowship began to be imprisoned. Of course, they did not remember how very recently they themselves had helped Stalin destroy the opposition. Yes, and even themselves too. After all, Stalin gave his own weak-willed victims the opportunity of taking a chance and rebelling, for this game was not without its satisfactions for him. To arrest each member of the Central Committee required the sanction of all the others. That is something the playful tiger thought up. And while the sham plenums and conferences proceeded, a paper was passed along the rows which stated impersonally that materials had been received compromising a certain individual. And it was requested that consent be given or refused to his expulsion from the Central Committee. And someone else watched to see whether the person reading this paper held it for a long time. Because you know what that means, right? If you're the one looking at the paper for a long time, it's probably you. who's about to be expelled. You know what that means, right? It's probably you. So everyone is watching to see who's the one holding on to that paper, for dear life. That's the one getting kicked out tonight. And they all signed their names. And that was how the Central Committee of the All Union Communist Party, Bolsheviks, shot itself. Stalin had calculated and verified their weakness even earlier than that. Once the top level of the party had accepted as their due high wages, secret provisioning facilities, private sanatoriums, it was already the trap and there was no way to backtrack. And they had forgotten even more. Yes, and had never read it anyway. Such ancient history as the message of the patriarch Tikhon of the Council of the People's Commissar on October 26, 1918. Appealing for mercy and for the release of the innocent, the staunch patriarch warned them that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required of this generation. That comes from the Bible, Luke 11:50. And for all for all they for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. That is from Matthew 26:52. But at that time it seemed absurd, impossible. How could they manage at that time that history sometimes does no revenge, a sort of voluptuous and delayed justice, but chooses strange forms for it and unexpected executors of its will? And though the curses of the women and children shot in the Crimean spring of 1921, as Voloshin has told us, were incapable of piercing the breast of Bela Kun, this was done by his own comrade in the Third International. I guess this is the Third International is a conference. Bela Kun is a person who was shot at the conference. Here is their inevitable morale. I have been imprisoned for nothing, and that means I am good. I have been imprisoned for nothing, and that means I am good. And that all these people around me are enemies and have been imprisoned for good cause. Here is that haughty nature of human beings. I am right, they are wrong. I am good, they are bad. When the truth is, we are all bad. We are just different degrees of bad. Or either we are all good, varying degrees of good, right? But I do this thing so much where I walk into a room and I immediately judge people. Judge them by the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they carry themselves. And I think, of course, I am better than them. I am more educated. I am more cultured. I am whatever. I am this or that. It doesn't matter what the thing is. But I often tend to view myself as higher than other people, even if we are all in a bad space. I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. This is something I'm not scared of saying. And I remember during my first couple of meetings, I walked into the rooms and immediately started judging everyone. You know, even as a struggling alcoholic, you think my alcoholism can't be as bad as the people who have been going to AA for all these years. I mean, they're here, right? That means their lives must have been terrible. My life is bad, but it's not that bad. I have a job, I have my wife, I have my kid. Things are not that bad. I'm obviously better than them. But then you start to speak to people, rather listen to people, and you realize, you know what? Their lives are actually pretty good. Being here works, right? Or rather, what they're saying is just a warning to me. It's good I ended up here when I did. It's good I ended up here when I did. I will proceed. And here is how their energy is spent. 6 and 12 times a year they send off complaints, declarations, and petitions. And what do they write about? What do they scroll in them? Of course, they swear loyalty to the great genius. And without that, they won't be released. Of course, they dissociate themselves from those already shot in their case. Of course, they beg to be forgiven and permitted to return to their old jobs at the top. And tomorrow, they will gladly accept any party assignment, whatever. even to run this camp. And the fact that all the complaints and petitions were met with just as thick a shoal of rejections, well, that was because they didn't reach Stalin. He would have understood, he would have forgiven the benefactor. Fine politicals they were if they begged the government for forgiveness. Here was the level of their consciousness. V.P. Golitsyn, son of a district physician, a road engineer, was imprisoned for 140 days in a death cell. And then he got 15 years, and after that, external exile. In my mind, he says, nothing changed. I was the same non party Bolshevik as before. My faith in the party helped me. The fact that the evil was being done not by the party and government, but by the evil will of certain people. What an analysis! Who came and went, but somehow they never seemed to go, but all the rest remained. However, why this whole chapter? Why this whole lengthy survey and analysis of the loyalists? Instead, we shall just write in letters a yard high. People, the three, I'll list three people's names written in the book. Janos Kadar, Gomulka, and Gustav Husak. All three of them underwent unjust arrest and interrogation with torture. And all three of them served time so and so many years. And the whole world sees how much they learned. The whole world has learned what they are worth. We do that all the time to ourselves, don't we? We become loyalists to a cause that loses its meaning, has lost its value, has shown us to be suboptimal. Going back to the solo drummist, the solo snare drummer. There was once a time in my life when I admired postmodernism. A time when I looked at contemporary art, as the height of human creativity. And if I can look deep inside myself and ask myself, why did I do this? One of the reasons I always come up with is that it made sense because it was easy. I didn't want to imagine ever being a painter and never having to spend 20 plus hours working on a piece. That seemed too hard. But the banana on a wall, that makes sense. And that's real art because it's expressing something. It's making you feel something, isn't it? When you see this piece of art, you feel angry because this artist lied to me. And the artist can just as well say to you, well, it got you talking about it, didn't it? And that's supposed to be the art. It got you talking. But when I listen to Vivaldi, or I look at a Monet, I realize now I can't do this. I can't play this. That's art. That's the height of human endeavor. Someone sacrificed so much to reach these heights. There is no way I can do that without sacrificing all the time. I have to sacrifice all of my time to create a Monet. I have to sacrifice all my time to play like Vivaldi. But to be a solo snare drummist who plays with the proficiency of a 1-year-old boy, I can do that too. So that makes sense to me, right? Well, dear listeners, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Oscar's Root or YouTube newsletter, whatever you want to call it. I will not give it a name right now. I don't have a name. Today we read from the Gulag Archipelago. Go and get yourself this book if you can. It is affordable on Amazon. This is the abridged version. It's a beautiful piece. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.